Hey guys, it's me again, it's Ben, and it's the Dren Show, and welcome back to our second episode. G'day, mate.
G'day, and welcome, Kelvin.
G'day.
So, mate, who have we got today?
Well, we have a surprise. It's Kelvin Ross, the founder of KJR, IntelliHQ, and Tataway.
Is that how you say it? Tataway?
Tataway, yep.
IntelliHQ,
IntelliHQ, yep.
KJR.
KJR, yeah.
Anything else?
There's a couple of other things there, but yeah, they're the main ones.
Well, welcome, mate. Thanks for being our second.
The Queensland AI Hub is the other one.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget that.
Yeah.
So, welcome, mate. Thanks for being our second victim. Or actually, you're probably the first. Last time we just did ourselves. So.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations, you're the first actual guest on the Ben and Dren Show.
What an honour.
So you got any questions planned for today, Dren?
We will have a bit of a chat, and we'll see where it goes. But basically, yeah, we would love to have your journey as an entrepreneur, and
cool.
Yeah, and especially interested about that distinct academia that you have behind you, and then the AI component. That would be amazing to hear.
I was wondering if the doctor was like a honorary, like sort of fake thing, but it's actually real, isn't it?
It's a real doctor. It's not even a medical doctor. It's a PhD in computer science. But the funny thing was, about 6 months before I finalised my PhD, they merged the computer science school with the electrical engineering school. So I've got a PhD in computer science and electrical engineering with only having done one engineering subject in first year of undergraduate. So I love to tease my engineer friends about that, I do have a PhD in engineering.
Yeah, so that's, interesting. So, now you're into IntelliHQ and the AI Hub and Tataway. So that's AI. So I think that's, we want to touch on that, but we also wanted to explore just your founder's journey, and I guess that starts back at KJR, which would be really interesting to, hear that transition from PhD into then starting your own business to growing that over 20 years. And just, a little bit of that story of, why you started that, how that came about, what your strategy was, and then how you started off and when you noticed that taking off as well.
Yeah, well, look, at the research centre, they took me on when I was finishing off my PhD, more or less, just entering into that postdoc phase.
Was that in 90s or something?
Yeah, that was that would have been about 95. And doesn't seem that long ago. It's been a blur. So they put me into a role with the research centre, had this funding, but their funding, I think they had 9 years of funding, but it was due to run out. And like most university research groups, they start thinking, wonder what's going to happen after the funding runs out. So about 3 years before it ran out, they started to think, maybe we should be, trying to do more of this defence work and things like that. So they sort of got me into what they called the business development coordinator role, and I was pretty green with that, but I'd grown up in a family of small business and things like that. So I think just going out and talking to customers and wanting to do sort of cool things with customers came naturally to me, which I don't think it comes naturally to most academics, to get out of the building. And we had about 20 or so quite experienced academics, but our focus was a bit more engaging in those defence projects, those railways projects and things like that, looking at how some of these more advanced techniques could be used for evaluating systems and some really cool stuff back there. One of the things we worked on there was the Nulka missile defence system was being developed out of Australia and supported by the Australian Navy, but at that stage it was probably 95% funded by the US Navy. And that was a rocket that shoots out of the back of the ship and then hovers and tries to draw a missile away from the ship towards it. And sort of during the Falklands War, there was like Prince Harry would fly up in a Harrier jet and the exorcists would come in and then they'd jump out of the way at the last minute and the missiles would shoot by. And,
wow.
and I guess they thought that princes are a bit scarce these days.
Yeah.
So instead,
it doesn't matter anymore. Those. Yeah.
No, probably, you know, there's plenty of them now, and most of them don't even want to stay in royalty, right? So we should put them in a fighter plane. And
I don't know much about that, about the royals, but
I don't think we want to know too much about them, right? It's like I lived part of the year in BC. That's probably another story, and you know, the fact that Harry's moved over there is sort of like, maybe there's a reason to move to a different place in the world. But anyhow, this system, you know, it got developed in Australia, and they couldn't develop it anywhere else. It sort of hovers a bit like now SpaceX land the rockets on their rocket.
Yep.
So back then, 25 years ago, Australia got that working, and nowhere else in the world could they get that functionality working.
Yeah, wow.
And that's turned into Australia's largest defence export, that product. Over $1 billion in sales.
Yep.
For that particular missile defence system.
Okay.
And, so interesting. But those projects go so long, right?
Yes. Yes.
So anyhow, I was working on those sort of projects, and they were really interesting from an intellectual point of view. But just thinking, there's got to be more opportunity. I was just getting a bit frustrated in the academic environment, and I really enjoyed that applied side of it. And I thought, there's got to be opportunity out in the commercial side of things, a bit more in banking and finance and those other areas. So I thought, look, I'll leave and go and try and set up my own small boutique consultancy. Maybe I can get myself and 4 of my mates together, and that'd be kind of cool. We'll do some fun projects. And so I left, and then one of our company I had a bit to do with in the railways side up in Brisbane engaged me to do some work, and that was literally my first contract. And then about 6 months later, they asked if I'd hire another person.
Yep.
And then I also referred a bunch of people in there from the research centre as well for work we were doing. And then just progressively things kept growing. So before long it was 5 people. You know, I hired a bunch of my mates from uni, postgrads. I think probably out of the 5, we had like 5 PhDs were our first 5 employees or something like that.
Wow.
And then, we're doing Y2K work and other testing and evaluation work. And just things kept growing. You know, we just wanted to help people to build good, reliable software.
Yep.
I don't think we had this huge business plan that we were going to conquer the world. There was no things called a startup back then, right? And then just things kept growing, and I sort of describe it, just had the tiger by the tail. Next minute we're 20 staff, and then we're opening offices in Sydney and Melbourne, and then go, geez, I wouldn't want to be more than 30, managing people's bloody hard work, right? And then it just grew and grew and grew.
And what is it sitting at now? How many people?
We actually decreased a bit in the last year or so, particularly COVID. A few people have moved on, and I think we're down about 85 at the moment.
That's amazing. Just a quick question. So about the consulting businesses, they're a bit fragile when you try to grow and scale in terms of industry-wise. Yeah. But you have such a great big company. You have managed to do that. So how is that possible?
Yeah. Look, and it was growing like 30-40% per annum when I was full on as CEO growing it. And it was just every time I was sort of handing stuff over from somebody else to take over some of my workload, just the workload kept increasing. So like I said, I just felt it was like the tiger by the tail, and more just doing more of what the customer's asking for, right? Like, and I think that's the thing. As a startup, you need to work out what the customer really wants, and if that's it, you just keep following that.
And it sounds like you sort of stumbled onto that a little bit at the start, but once you got that unique differentiation, like it sounds like there wasn't too many people doing what you were doing.
Because the company's over 23 years old now, and we're just chatting. I've got a couple of those. Probably my first 3 employees. There's an admin person as my second person, but my first 3 consulting hires are still with the company.
That's awesome.
After 20 something years.
Yeah.
But we had this strategic planning retreat. When we were like 8 staff or something over at Stradbroke Island at Point Lookout. We just rented a house and had a good weekend together, and a lot of the guys still talk about that was just about that purpose and vision of what we're trying to do without the explicit business plan and we're going to be this by this stage, but just that real sort of here's what we care about and deeply care about, and just sticking to those sort of principles in many respects. Yeah. And I think those elements are still there now. And it's been interesting, the last 10 years, I stepped back running that business about 10 years ago. My wife got diagnosed with breast cancer about 10 years ago. And that was sort of like, after running the business for 14 years, it was sort of like a kick up the arse, really, because it was like the way I was working was sort of like 70, 80 hours a week, traveling all the time. And you kind of think, it should have been me, with that sort of unhealthy lifestyle. What the hell am I doing?
Just get your priorities straight. And
But equally, I had a 8-year-old and a 5-year-old as well. And it's like, shit, I'm not ready to be a single parent. And
well, I was going to ask you about that because I think it's great. Like, you're such a humble guy, and it was so funny. Like, Dren, we just, the 5 minutes of research we did today, Dren was like, is this Kelvin's company on LinkedIn? It's like, there's like 90 employees on this.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's it. Yeah, and he's like, what the hell? And then just one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I found so amazing, was that transition that you did from somebody who has a full-time business, running it, being in it every day, to then stepping back and then doing all the amazing things you're doing now. But but that company still is existing and running without you, and you still own it. But you're not in it every day. I think that's every founder's dream, or that's the whole purpose of people starting businesses, is to actually give themselves more time. But then when they get, as you were saying before, when they get into it, they end up with less time, and they end up, and it's not till like some sort of event happens. But is that was that the event that made you step back?
Yeah, it definitely was. I think, if it wasn't for that, I'm not sure what would have happened. I probably just would have kept, working like a maniac and ended up probably getting a divorce 10 years later because you had nothing to do with your kids and your family, sort of thing, right?
Yeah. But how did you transition? Like, how did you do that? So you actually
straight
still
away
own the company.
It was a holy shit moment,
yeah.
Right? Because Mel was going through literally the week after she thought there was a problem. She was in chemotherapy and couldn't get out of bed for a week, right?
Oh, no.
So every 2 weeks getting chemo and things like that. So, there was part of the element was I had no choice but to step back and look after the kids and look after Mel. But then, and luckily as well, like in those early stages of business, that we had invested in some insurances and things like that. So we ended up getting quite a reasonable payout through our broker for like trauma insurance that we had both me and Mel covered.
Yes.
Because I think, probably through that I had to step back. It had a big impact on the running of the business. I eventually hired some other sort of key management staff into place, but it definitely hit the bottom line of the business. And, it probably would have cost like $500,000 to just deal with that. Yeah. And, at that stage in the business, we were fair size by then. We were probably like 60 people.
Yes.
Just really scrambling to try and get those other things in place. But, the realisation was there that I'm not going back to that old way of craziness. So it sort of forced me into that succession planning thinking, which probably you should maybe do earlier. While business is growing, you just sort of, tiger by the tail, right? It's look, and so we're pretty lucky to have that sort of financial support. For some businesses, it would be catastrophic that not only do you have that health crisis in your family, but it wipes out your business and your life savings and things like that. So,
and I guess you might have been, your company was at a critical scale where you had a little bit of support around you, which would have been a lucky thing.
Yeah, definitely lots of good support from the staff and things like that. In that time, just they realised, shit, he's got things that are more important, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's with all your staff, realising that, there's times like that where your staff have things that are more important than work and where you as a company can sort of stand behind them in those sort of situations.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I was lucky that I had those people in the company that could do that. But and then over time, we then looked at, this change is permanent sort of thing.
Yep.
And then got to a point where starting to put on board a CEO.
Proper structures to manage it.
And it was interesting when I first stood back. I thought because I appointed an operations manager that I hired in, a guy from the UK, and then had a sales manager sort of thing came in, and we sort of had that structure, and I was sort of just very much part-time, but just a little bit of miscoordination and things like that. And it wasn't quite gelling, and so then I had a review, and somebody said, "You got to get out. You can't be a part-time CEO. You're either all in or you're all out."
Right.
And I think to some extent that makes right. At the end of the day, there needs to be a clear decision-making structure where there's accountability and there's authority and accountability to get things done. So we restructured and said, okay, well, let's appoint a CEO. We promoted one of those guys internally, and it didn't work out that well. Within 6 months, we actually had to change that. And part of that was there was a big change up in Queensland at the time with the Newman government came on board.
Right.
And we were probably doing about $4 million a year in consulting just with the Queensland government. And basically the Newman government just came in and turned everything off.
Right.
For everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why they lost the next election is not only did it hit businesses like ours, and you could understand for a period while they reevaluate, but our income dropped from about 4 million to 750,000. So that's like 3/4 of our income in that region with say 20 odd staff. And then the person that we had managing things at the time just, it's going to turn around, and no, it's not. And if we keep going like this, there won't be any coming back for us.
Yeah, wow.
So some hard choices had to be made to lay some staff off and things like that for the survival of the rest of the business and for the rest of the employees. But yeah, just basically we had to move that person on because they were just a bit paralysed from realising that's what needed to be done.
And did it take, was it a matter of years for you to transition out of the business from when...
Yeah, well, there's probably no more quicker that I think the really weird thing is, and I was chatting with another business mate of mine that when I first stepped out of it, it was almost like, I don't want to know about it. It was almost, and a friend of mine said he had the same thing with himself. And it's almost like a grief process that, this thing that you've developed and built. And now all of a sudden someone else is running it and, and it's almost your immediate reaction is, oh God, I just need to be away from it or whatever. But then it was that same friend of mine said, look, if you don't pay a bit of attention as the business owner, this will just disappear from you. You know, and so you've got to step in and at least.
So you found a balance there. And
well, just having to step in and make a call on that and we changed CEOs and things like that to step in and just not let somebody. You want to give a CEO a lot of own decision making and but you've got to keep that accountability. And if they're not prepared to sort of resolve something that is life-threatening for the business, you've got to act. At the end of the day, as an owner or a board director, where you've appointed a CEO, you don't want to step into the day-to-day decisions of the CEO, but ultimately your main role is you hire and fire that CEO if they're not sort of delivering what needs to be done for the business.
Did you have a question about the AI stuff?
Yeah, well, firstly,
the AI stuff.
AI technical. We could
something to do with that.
We have to touch bases on some of the important topics. I guess so. Regarding because your background is academia and entrepreneurship, so you're both into it. But how do you see that? Does it help one another? Or
I think in many respects, I sort of bridge this role. It's not that common, I think, that people tend to straddle it a lot. But I think it's quite useful in some areas, like this sort of med tech area, where you can sort of go from the research to the commercialization side. But it's funny, my heart lies in the engineering. I love the technical side, the mathematics side of AI, and love to, it's almost like I'm so busy during the week, it's now my hobby on the weekend to actually go and build neural nets and things like that. But I think, as much as I love that, it's more about how do I grow the team to do those things, and how do I mentor and develop them, because I know there's many other people that can't do that bridging in terms of how you might be able to raise funding for that kind of work, or how you get that overlap between academia and sort of commercialisation and whatnot. So so while I'd probably be really quite content sort of, just hacking some code and doing things like that more.
Yep.
I just realise I've got to sort of be that bridge a bit more.
Yep. Yep. And maybe just briefly describe, what Tataway is.
Yeah.
People who don't know.
Yeah. So look, Tataway.
And HQ.
Yeah. So probably it falls out of they're all connected. So again, it comes back to, I met Brent. I had an AI startup in the travel industry. So again, it came from skiing, having too much time on my hands, sitting on a chairlift with some of my mates, and many of them are high net worth people, and all pondering, we're always solving other people's problems, right?
Yeah.
And we just thought, they waste all this money with how they manage the resources in the ski resort, and so we thought up this idea about a better way to market and things like that, skiing using AI, and I think in principle it makes a lot of sense, but what I think going into that space was the travel market is a bloody hard market to compete in. And almost to the point that I think what we built out was pretty good, which was like an AI planner, a recommender system, a bit like, Spotify and Google recommends things, but it could sort of personalise your trip specifically to your interest. And then use AI to actually work out the itinerary about when are you arriving, when do you get your ski passes, and where should you stay relevant to your interests and things like that. So really come up with that bespoke itinerary for a trip.
Okay.
So it's a cool concept, but just, like anything with a startup, it's about a startup's really about finding a sustainable business model.
Yes.
Right? Like how do I actually make money so I can do that? So it's sort of cool, and some of my high net worth investor friends said, "Oh, that's cool. Let's put a bit of money into it," and we did. We all put a bit of money into it, and I kind of after 2 years, you go, "It's a friggin' hard way to make money."
Bit of a beast.
Coming out of the tech space where easily I could go and earn $2,000 a day or something like that, and then I'm struggling to get travel industry people paying $17 an hour for coders and stuff like that, right? And go, shit, there's got to be an easier way to make money than this.
Yeah. But what I love about, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, they'll start with an idea where you had with the travel one.
Yeah.
And even though it's a failure, it's not really a pivot, but the learnings and even just doing that led to the next thing you do.
I agree. I think, this is encouraging entrepreneurs to take that leap and create their first startup. Yeah. It's probably going to fail.
Yeah. I think you have to.
Set them up for their third startup, right?
I love being a little bit naive. I think there's a lot in being naive, but to me it's like the key is to be persistent and not give up. Like just keep going.
Exactly.
And eventually it'll turn into something.
Yeah, exactly. So out of that, I was starting to do a lot more work with Brent, and then we set up the non-profit IntelliHQ. The other guy that was Ben Tattersfield was with the travel startup with me. I hired Ben as, had a small income and came on board as a co-founder. Yep. And he went on to the Smart Ball as his next idea. Yep.
And that's another example of something that's gone
raised a couple of $1 million. Yeah. So, I think it's those things of continuing on the journey, that but then, with the what Brent and I started working on, it was just seeing how AI is really going to impact healthcare, and how do we set up, being based here on the Gold Coast, we've got all this untapped potential with Griffith Uni, and you want to develop these opportunities for students and people to get into the technology industry. Yep. It's a great place to live and work. Yep. And we've got a lot of great things about Australia in terms of stable regulation and great healthcare systems. Yep. So how do we use that to really grow opportunities here? So that's what Brent and I really worked on, was trying to leverage AI, but leverage that to create good collaborations to create jobs and industry here. Yeah.
And on that, we've got a great healthcare system. It's great for patients, but it's majoritively public. So is that a challenge where you're negotiating a public system where there's procurement, there's rules, it's government bodies, whereas the US is generally very private. It's also super entrepreneurial, and their systems and their structures are made up to be a little bit more, let's turn that into a product, or let's bring that, let's commercialize that kind of thing.
Because I think if you sat down and talked about a data sharing agreement with, say, a US hospital, their conversation being, basically wholly private, it would be, well, how do we make a buck out of the data we've collected?
Yep.
Where I think if you're dealing with a public health issue, you've got to have that, what's the public benefit, right?
Yep.
People are wary about data sharing, privacy concerns. And this is what Tataway's about, is setting up, we found the biggest limitation to create AI startups in healthcare was actually access to data.
Yep.
And then accessing the hospital to actually co-develop and get the workflow and everything, the integration and the evidence sorted out.
Yep.
So, if you're sharing data in public health, you've got to think about, well, first of all, are you trusted to share that data? Have you met all the obligations? Is it an application that meets the public good in terms of expectation? But also, are you just not, you're not exploiting the data there? And look, around the world, big pharma companies and Google and these guys, they will pay millions to access a health data set.
Yep.
But almost monopolise it, right, for their own purpose. Where I think the future is how we create that democracy. So how do we still maybe get them to pay for access to data for doing projects which are good? And I'm, it's worth saying that Google and these companies are doing amazing projects that are benefiting the developing world and things like that.
Yep.
But equally, they know that there's commercial value in the data as well. So how do we also open that up to academia and startups and so on, so that they can get access to that data without spending millions, perhaps subsidised by the big players, or once they make millions, they actually pay back for some of that access to data, because it costs a lot to get that data out and share it and make it ready.
Yeah.
So, and I think and people say, oh, you shouldn't have to pay for it. If somebody doesn't pay for it, it doesn't happen.
Yes.
It's a bit like people crack up about Big Pharma and go, oh, they're evil. They're, making money out of these new drugs that are saving the world. Well, those drugs wouldn't be created unless there was a return on investment for those investors to spend billions of dollars to get the drugs to market, right?
Yep.
So, you just got to make sure that we're achieving that, but not creating monopolies and exploitation of that in the back end.
Yeah, and just to have that ethical component, especially on the health, industry. What's interesting with startups and businesses commercializing the AI product and services here, I haven't seen much. For example, I was 2 years ago, I was visiting Uptake, which is a startup, I don't know, now scale up at 3 billion valued.
Yep.
They're doing machine learning on transportation industry, and they have clients like they don't rely much on funding. They have clients and they're reliable in the market. And so I'm thinking, why, or is it hard to have something like that developed here in terms of trusting the industry and giving them opportunity to commercialize? Yeah,
look, I think I think like many areas of our technology sort of startups, Australia often does struggle to raise capital and things like that, and that's a perennial problem that we're all trying to work on to make our industry smarter about how, I think there's a knowledge thing about knowing how to tap into it, but as well as access to markets and things like that. Yeah. So they're things we've got to resolve. But look, in the AI space, there's these things out there that we just don't know about, right? They're just, we don't celebrate them in Australia. So I was just on the phone earlier this afternoon with a company that's raised Series A capital with using AI for vibration detection on plant and equipment. Got 30 staff funded now and up in Brisbane, and cool. So that's where the AI Hub's got to step in and help promote those. And then like we work with Bruce Satchwell from Alive Tech, and he was the engineer behind the Alive Core, which is like when I was over at CES in Vegas, that's the biggest tech trade show in the world. Yeah. And in the med tech consumer space, they go, oh, we need to do it like Alive Core, where they're the first FDA approved AI consumer product. in 2014. And it took like 3 years before the next AI product came along.
Yep.
And I'm going, oh, those are those three guys around the corner in the shed.
Yeah,
the back of Southport. And you think this guy's world famous over in Las Vegas at CES.
Yep.
But would anyone in Queensland know him?
Mm.
Then, the largest, in terms of AI, there's companies that like label data for like autonomous cars and things like that.
Yep.
The biggest in the world doing that now is actually Appen, listed on the ASX. It's worth $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Probably the average Australian wouldn't even have a clue that they're one of the leaders in the AI space around the world, right?
Yeah.
So this is the thing, is we're not out there actually celebrating these entrepreneurs and these success stories enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think, is it at the beginning of the AI story, or are we in the middle of it and we don't quite know it, or just, it is more advanced? A
bit like Winston Churchill. It's not the end of the beginning.
Yeah. I don't know if what I just said made any sense, but some backwards topsy-turvy.
We're a little bit late to the start in Australia, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the amount of investment going in overseas, I was over in Boston. We've got a relationship with MIT, and while I was there, they announced MIT, BlackRock had put in $300 million US to fund $1 billion AI centre at the university.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Australia, in the federal government budget 2 years ago, we'll put 30 million.
And that's what my question about compete. Can we compete?
I don't think we can compete at the sort of macro level to what's going on between US and China.
Mm.
I think we've got to be like Canada.
Yep.
Canada are world leaders. Again, I love the Canadians.
You're talking to Boot.
Yeah, that's right.
In AI, they're leaders in AI.
Yeah, many people wouldn't know, but all the godfathers of AI for deep learning came out of Toronto. So you've got like Geoffrey Hinton, sort of like the godfather of deep learning. Jan LeCun, he now heads up AI for Facebook out of New York. So those guys, and as a result of that, like Canada's AI industry has boomed because like Facebook's put research centres up there. Google DeepMind's put a research centre in Edmonton. They punch so far above their weight for their investment.
Yep.
And I think Australia's got to think a little bit like that, but equally, I think this comes back to sticking to our niches. What are those areas? Could we compete on autonomous vehicles? So I don't think we could raise the capital,
not since we don't have a manufacturer. Manufacturer just left last year, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but interesting. I was involved with like Queensland's trying to develop the drone strategy, right?
Yeah.
And I think from a military and a defence and a civilian use of drones for say firefighting or delivery, what we can do is we've got such diverse environmental settings really to test everything. So setting that up and then investing in the the digital infrastructure, the digital twins, and how we train those AI systems of the future.
Yep.
I think we can leverage those strengths and sort of become a real niche player in those sort of sectors. Similarly in mining and environment, like stuff around. I was at a talk, all the robots that guys have been using on the Great Barrier Reef. Well, there's only one Great Barrier Reef in the world.
Yep.
We could actually be the centre for sort of, underwater robotics and environmental sensing in that area, right?
Yeah.
So, so how do we leverage those things and really pick fights that we think we've got a fair chance of winning, right? It's
Yep.
Yeah.
And it also comes down to individuals, doesn't it? Like I think a lot of the, clever Australians of the past, inventing Wi-Fi and stuff with the ears and
I think we've been great at that. But where we've missed out is that bloody commercialisation bit, right?
Yeah.
So how do we really exploit that? Because that's the jobs driver, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what's going to create the jobs. It's it's the R&D stuff and relying on grants. It pays for a few jobs.
Yep.
But it's actually when you implement...
Go in that next step, taking that dirt and turning it into something else.
That's right.
Yep.
Doing that enrichment process is going to be where we create more jobs. Yeah.
So with a Queensland AI hub, so this is the opportunity for you guys now to bring that commercialization maybe in the industry and help the startups thrive, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think that's the hardest part to get right. We talk in startup weekends about hacker, the hustler, and the hipster, right? And in the healthcare space, we talk about the hacker, the hustler, and the healer. And it's pretty easy to get a hipster and a hacker together, or a healer and a hacker together, like Brent and I.
Yeah.
But getting that commercial person, and when you chat to the VC guys, there's this MVP that's developed, but they really don't have the skills and experience to really go through that capital raising commercialization phase. So I think that's the biggest gap in our market. But even the way in Australia, all of our fundings, I think Advanced Queensland said they had a review done, and some, I think it was Harvard or something did a review and said, we've never seen a place that has so much R and so little D, that we've spent like 50 times more on research, but
someone could
we haven't
interpret
done
that as meaning something differently. But.
But I think that's the gap. And again, the AI hub is not about R&D.
Yeah.
There's plenty of other things that can be done in that space, but how do we create that industry growth element and implementation component?
We need more D.
Yeah,
get a t-shirt. I don't know if I would wear that.
Well.
I'm going to wear that one.
No. Yeah, no. Who knows what the interpretation of that one will be?
Got D. Well, let's finish. Any more questions? Finish it off with a few stupid questions. Or what about Terminator 2? Do you ever sort of get worried that you could be the guy that they're trying to kill for of ruining the world?
Everyone goes, and again, and everyone has the right to determine what work they want for their purpose. But I look back to the defence sector, and I loved my time in defence, and I saw it as a bit of a public service thing, right? But I know other people have real objections to defence, but there's this massive fear around weaponised defence for AI, and it's all driven out of the media and hype. But I worked on a combat system with the Australian Navy 25 years ago that had a fully autonomous missile defence system. It could be turned on where no human would get engaged.
Wow.
But they go, we can't see a scenario where we'd actually allow that mode to be enabled.
Yep.
It would always have to have a human in the loop, because people don't realise in warfighting, there's really, for professional armies, there's really strict rules of engagement. And, because otherwise you sort of, you will literally start a war if you don't engage in things in the right way.
Yep.
But I think there's a lot of things that what I've seen out of the defence industry is how some of these things which might be initially for, rescuing an injured soldier or an injured civilian.
Yep.
Those things can be applied into the civilian space for disaster recovery.
Yep.
I think a lot of the work in environmental sensing for the Barrier Reef has actually come out of work that the Navy's done in terms of, hydrology, hydrographic studies and things like that. So, so I think and even I had a friend whose daughter was a paramedic, and I said, oh, look, it's a really tough job being a paramedic for like Queensland Ambulance. Has she thought about joining the RAAF for humanitarian airlifts and stuff? And that's probably what a lot of those guys mainly do. Like they're down sort of in COVID stuff at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, but people still, that's war and things like that. So, so I sort of have those sectors about, what's the responsible thing as a country we do around defence, and that overlaps to what's responsible in AI. But I think this whole thing of Terminator thing, AI still got...
And I think if we turn into robots or the robots take over, it'll be because we choose to turn into robots
I think
ourselves.
At the end of the day, any technology, it's sort of like putting a ban on development of technology will never work.
Yes.
What has to happen is humans have to work out what are the rules that are acceptable in our communities in the way that technology is used. And then we'll put in place what the appropriate rules and treaties are.
What kind of timeframes do you think it'll be, with AI taking over?
Because I don't know that we'll get there.
Well, not taking over, but it becomes a normal, the technology becomes really normal in products and
look, I think there's many areas now where it is normal.
Yeah.
People don't realise.
No, absolutely.
How the hell did, when you had to look up an address and you use Google Maps, right?
5 years ago, you probably, acted differently and searched differently.
That's right. It's pretty ubiquitous now. You know, it's everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's been the big tech companies that have driven and seen the real value. They're AI companies, right? Google was an AI company from day dot.
Yep.
What's happening now is that how is it going to impact every company? And this is the thing from COVID as well. Like, as I was listening to a thing this morning, which was quite apt, and it's sort of saying, you know, with COVID, sort of digital was sort of nice to have, but it wasn't essential. Where now with COVID, it's sort of like if you aren't digitizing your business, you've been pretty screwed over by COVID, right? And will you ever get out? So I think what we're going to see is a real transformation of our industry.
It's an absolute supercharge for all of that kind of stuff, and it's just shown to all the managers and all those, you know, the top level management who said it can't work. They've just gone, oh, actually it can work, and oh, actually we can save this much money by doing it. You know, as someone, you know, we've got the co-working side of things here, and we see, you know, I've always seen, you know, I think the part-time is the way to go. I still think you need some time out of the house. I need that. Most people do. So I think that's going to be supercharged out of this. But just the technologies too. I think they're all going to get better because there's more people in the market now. So there's more, you know, VC, you know, equipment will get better, and
there's
software will improve.
There's plenty of opportunities going to come out of COVID. You know, sure, there's businesses are getting decimated, but equally, you know, I thought for a while there that investment had really frozen, but I'm starting to hear that investors are really searching for those things that they can put their money into because they're not making it anywhere else, right? So they are really seeking out, particularly around technology, as the key investment, you know, moving forward. So
there's almost this sense of extreme optimism going on at the moment. I don't know if it's just this weird time we're in and this place we're in Queensland. But specifically, like, I mean, the real estate market has done the opposite to what everyone thought. I think, you know, the stuff coming out of the vaccine starting to get really positive as well. So, you know, people are thinking if this is sort of done and dusted by March, or there's, you know, vaccine options by March, middle of next year, things are going to rebound extremely quickly.
Definitely,
You know, we're in for an interesting.
And I think certain businesses like co-working has the potential to really grow quite dramatically, right?
Well, it does, but at the same, you know,
people don't want to be in an office at the moment, but that won't stay forever. People will want blended things because there's certain amounts of work that you've got to actually get in the same room for some things. But I think it's going to be how we collaborate, you know, how we blend our work.
There's going to be enormous challenges for the real estate market. You know, not only, you know, is retail shifting to online, and that's the other thing. I think people have bought a lot of things online during COVID as well, which has got them used to that process if they weren't already. It's, you know, the online retailers are booming. So that's going to be bigger. So that means there's less retail floor plates required. I think, you know, workforces are going to be used to not working in the office, so there's going to be less floor plates required there. So that'll be the challenge for landlords, and that's co-working will boom. But, you know, the landlords will have to go to that model just to get a yield because, you know, it's going below 5%.
Look, I think, you know, there's going to be a whole shake-up of commercial property, mainly because the dynamic is going to change quite a lot. And, you know, owning commercial property up in Brisbane, shit, do I sell it because I kind of feel it might devalue just as my own location, or maybe we should chat about turning it.
Well, we're always available to out there.
But I think those elements are what companies will be looking at, different ways of setting up those models.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're getting the wind down.
The
lights are about to dim.
Hurry up.
Wait, we can chat or we'll turn the cameras off and we'll just keep chatting.
That's right. Bugger the rest of them.
Well, mate, thanks for your time and thanks for, really interesting.
I just wanted to say how lucky that we have you around. Just like
No, I love working. You guys are doing such a great job here, and I think it's really key what you're doing, right? It's just connecting the community. So I love your work.
Awesome, mate. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for another amazing episode of the Ben and Dren Show. Actually, we might. Can we add Kelvin in every week? Kelvin, I don't know. No,
it depends. Are you going to get better beers?
He's a pretty busy guy. He's a pretty busy guy.
Yeah.
So stay tuned to next episode. We're not going to reveal who we've got next episode because we haven't booked them yet. But be sure it'll be maybe half as good as Kelvin. So thanks, Kelvin, and good night.
Thanks for listening and watching. Thanks, Kelvin.
Yeah.